I'm Bruce Whitfield, and like you, I'm preparing to take a little bit of time off with my family to reflect on where we are and what we might get up to in the new year. And like many, you are probably quite apprehensive about what 2025 has got in store. The world feels like it's coming apart at the seams, and in a world awash with problems, the opportunity comes to fix those problems. We could do things better. What's the point of getting dragged into the prevailing sense of gloom and doom? That's not going to help. So, as we wrap up what's been a difficult year, I've delved into the small archive of the Art of Deciding podcast to draw some pivotal lessons from my awesome guests about how to think differently about a world in flux. I had a conversation with a chief executive the other day about his leadership style, and he replied, "I've never met someone reasonable in the world who's created something significant." And I was a bit taken aback. He didn't mean unreasonable, did he? Well, he was emphatic. "No," he said. "If I became reasonable, I'd achieve nothing. Standards would slip, complacency would step in. So no, I am unreasonable." I've been thinking about this hard, and I wonder whether you do need to be unreasonable to succeed at the highest levels. Is that a key character trait of those at the top of their game? You think Steve Jobs, you think of Henry Ford, and others of their ilk whose reputations suggest they can be deeply unreasonable to work for. They refuse to compromise, they refuse to cut corners or take easy decisions because they had a very clear idea of what they were trying to achieve. A friend of mine who runs an advertising agency was reflecting on the deluge of depressing news flow as 2024 wraps up. And he posted on Facebook recently the consequences of quick fixes, and I need to read this to get it right. He writes, "Hard choices pave the way for an easier future, while easier choices inevitably lead to harder consequences. Yet humanity often defaults to ease, ensuring a harder road ahead." Now, perhaps good quality decision-making relies on unreasonableness, spending the time to get to the right answer, refusing to meet halfway. The best decision often is not the easiest or the most comfortable to accept and implement. Being unreasonable, I don't think, needs to mean that you shout and scream and perform until you get your own way, but it does mean that you push for the very best possible outcome without compromise. Perhaps it's all about being unreasonable. It may be a key ingredient in the complex tapestry of decision-making, which is emerging as we wrap up Season 1 of The Art of Deciding and prepare to launch a brand new series in the new year. Here's a summary of some of the key things that I've picked up, in no particular order, by the way. One lesson from each episode to mull over as you reflect on your 2024. Let's kick off at Episode 4, The Art of Deciding, with Lord Karen Bullamoria, who talks about entrepreneurial mindsets and the idea of serendipity. It's a big word for luck, I suppose, being in the right place at the right time. I once asked the founder of a global pharmaceuticals business how he made decisions on acquisitions based on the fact that his rivals surely received much the same sort of approaches and business intelligence that he did. His reply was amazing. He had a rule that if an investment banker proposed a deal to him, it was already too late to do the deal, as others had spotted the opportunity, and the price that would be expected of the deal would be far higher than he was prepared to pay. So instead, he incentivized his staff on the ground to bring him first-hand information about potential deals, and the business grew into a serious global player, in more than 50 countries as a result. It's about, he says, making your own luck. Now, Karen quotes one of his mentors to describe serendipity as seeing what everyone else sees, but thinking what no one else is thinking. And the best part is that this is a skill you can cultivate, and there are plenty of other valuable lessons in that episode as well. When last did you do something, for example, that really scared you? I saw a comment the other day from the Atomic Habits author James Clear's newsletter in which he wrote, The common narrative is that kids learn faster than adults, but if you watch any toddler, they spend a large proportion of the day attempting things that are on the edge of their ability. How much have you spent on the edge of your ability today? Now, you can choose to dismiss that as motivational poppycock, or you can ponder it for a moment. From my favourite lesson from Sir Brad Freed in episode 3. And contrary to what you might think for someone who chaired the Bank of England through Brexit and COVID, he finds making decisions very, very difficult. And he uses the term that he is faced continuously with grinding uncertainty. And he says, and I love this piece of guidance, that you need to surround yourself with people who have enough scar tissue to make decisions in the face of grinding uncertainty and live with the outcomes, knowing that if they do make the wrong call, they're big enough and experienced enough to reconvene, admit that they've made a mistake, and mitigate the downside. It's an intense episode. It's full of valuable lessons, especially on the power of humility in leadership, the power of silence, the power of the question as opposed to the statement. And one of the most gratifying pieces of feedback I've received so far in this series came from a father who referred his nearly 30-year-old son to the Brad Freed episode, in which he explains the best ways of getting teams to deliver the best possible decisions. And I'm told that listening to those lessons had a really positive effect on his approach to running his own team. So that's really good to know. It strikes a chord and it suggests that the podcast is having an impact. Good decision making is hard. The reality is that we so often procrastinate when it comes to making big decisions. We avoid making tough calls, or we look for compromises. We try and be reasonable. We can simply delay the pain that swift action can solve quite quickly. And ultimately, the longer we leave decisions, and this is something very valuable I've picked up through this series, the longer we leave decisions, the fewer and fewer options we have into the future to resolve the problem. So often making a strong decision early on means that you have a whole suite of options open to you that are not going to be open to you later on. This is key in the Lee Child stories. He talks about those options in episode 1. When a writer's faced with a blank page, he says the number of storylines and options open to him are limitless. But the moment the first line, the first paragraph is written, the universe of possibilities shrinks to a point where ultimately there is only one logical outcome to a story. And yeah, there's a life lesson in that as well. Your optionality is reduced the moment you make a decision, and it narrows for every subsequent decision you make after that. And if that isn't enough motivation to make really good quality decisions, I don't know what is. How often do you force yourself to slow down? So often we watch dynamic leadership teams thrive on rapid-fire decisions, and there's a place for that. But you might be able to learn from the interrogators of the mass murderer Anders Breivik, who killed 77 people in Oslo and on the island of Utøya in the early 2010s. Superintendent Asbjørn Raklu is leading a Europe-wide revision of police interviewing techniques, what you might have called interrogations previously, using methodologies that build rapport and trust with a suspect whom, if they are guilty of the offence they're being accused of, are probably the best witness to the events as they unfolded and are more likely to share information if treated with respect rather than judgment and animosity. It's not my job to judge. That's what Asbjørn Raklu says. It's my job to get information. And it's such a critical skill in policing and in interrogation, but surely as a leader, isn't it a wonderful tool that when somebody brings an idea to you, rather than shut them down immediately and say to them, we tried that 5 years ago, hear them out, get them to flesh out their idea. I know it's time-consuming, and I know some people have not always got the best ideas, but your job as a leader is to get the very best out of your team. The power of silence, the power of shutting up, the power of making time to listen is absolutely key in a successful interrogation of somebody like Anders Breivik, and ensuring slow time to reflect and assess the information that you're extracting, slowing down rather than bowing to the daily pressures for a speedy outcome and a resolution and a decision, sometimes there is space for slow down. From the former poker player and the former world poker champion Liv Bourrie, the fabulous lesson, who would echo so much of what you hear with Asbjorn as well, is that you need to suspend your biases and your deeply held beliefs when making critical decisions. You can't simply rely on gut instinct. Possibly you've honed a gut instinct over entire careers, but what it does is it opens you up to making errors of judgment based on your brain's deep-seated desire to be proven right, rather than approaching an issue with an open and inquiring mind, which constantly challenges your assumptions, of course, because so often our assumptions are based on dated information, false memories, what we hope is true, rather than what data or facts will suggest. Have you ever wondered why so many brilliant people at the helm of market-leading companies drive themselves and their firms into the ground? I love the example, for example, of BlackBerry, the messaging device which was adored by high-flying executives in the middle part of the 1990s, all the way up until not long after the iPhone emerged. They got to a point where they stopped challenging themselves. They stopped challenging their platform. They developed a hubris because they believed they were impossible to disrupt. They had a device which users loved. It had a recognizable keyboard that, thanks to the opposable thumbs of Homo sapiens, made it ideal for quick messaging, email on the move. It was revolutionary. By the time they realized that iOS and Android had stolen the march on their system, it was too late. A former staffer turned analyst reflects that internal hubris, which helped fuel the initial success of BlackBerry, also helped contribute to its downfall. They stopped thinking critically about what they were doing. They stopped looking at the competitive landscape as a threat or a risk, and simply affirmed their own biases. They stopped challenging themselves and thinking broadly. They continued, and here's maybe the problem and something we can all learn from this tale. BlackBerry continued to grow market share in the 2 years after the iPhone was launched, and it created the belief within the management team that they were never going to be disrupted. People who rely on intuition are intellectually lazy. Episode 5, Liv Bourrie, astrophysicist turned poker player. Deep thinker. Marvelous episode. And finally, I was really taken by the infectious energy and charm of Sharmadean Reed, who is on a mission particularly to help younger women in business avoid so many of the pitfalls which she experienced starting up her businesses, revolutionizing the way beauty is sold. And so many of the pitfalls that crush the aspirations of startup founders every day. And from her, I learned the power of sharing and not being precious about intellectual property, and the importance of research and data analytics to test whether a business idea will fly or not was absolutely invaluable. I just love the reviews that people have been posting as they've been reflecting and listening to the episodes themselves, and the different lessons people are taking from the Art of Deciding podcast. You've got people who spend their days bumping heads in boardrooms listening to Lee Child talking about timidity and the decisions he wished he'd taken. I just love the depth of the learning so far. I love the awesome storytelling. I love the production values that Jane Morgan at Podcast has delivered. And I'm just so grateful to people who have backed this project and supported this project and have said yes when we asked them to do the interviews. Here's to 2025, where we will deliver more on the art of deciding.